proper response to the gospel. Let's talk about it. Jesus, coffee. So yesterday, monster video talking about the gospel. Because that topic deserves that length of video. Today I want to talk about our response to that topic. How do we respond, or how should we respond to the gospel? I'm going to talk about this wristband I wear. I believe, talk about that. There's a song by Felipe that talks about what our response should be to the gospel. So I want to go over one, and really what I'm going to talk about here is, when I talk about our response, I'm going to talk about being ashamed of the gospel versus being bold with the gospel. There's really only two ways to go there. You're either ashamed of it, and you're ashamed of the persecution that's going to come with it. You're ashamed of the being mocked, jeered, being called a Jesus freak, being called a Bible thumper. You're ashamed of it. Let's just call it what it is. All right? So for that passage, I really want to talk about, which is actually today's YouVersion verse of the day. It's actually Romans 1:16. And I want to talk about Phil Wickham's lyric and actually the bridge of the song. So in this portion of the letter to Rome that Paul writes, he's talking about how the just live by faith. So he says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes, for the Jews first, and also for the Greeks," or the Gentiles. And then he says in verse 17, "For in it the righteousness of God is revealed, from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith." And the bridge in Phil Wickham's song, I Believe, which is a powerful song, I'll put the link to it, says, "I'll never be ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. How can I ever walk away from the one who saved my life? I'll never be ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. How can I ever walk away from the one who saved my life?" Hits a nail right on the head for me. I mean, I'll never be ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And because he did save my life. He took me from being lying, cheating, manipulating, adulterer, devastated two families, to the man I am today, which is not that man, not that guy anymore. I used to spend my free time perusing through social media, perusing through and just looking for the next person to talk to, looking for the next victim, really. More than 6. So Paul says, "For I'm not ashamed of the gospel." I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, right? "For it is the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes." And that was really, if you've watched The Chosen, that's really where the Pharisees got chapped. Was Jesus is also allowing the Gentiles to be saved? Oh. Not the Gentiles. Oh. They're not Jewish. They don't come to the temple. That elitist attitude. Their religion. For the Jew first and also for the Greek. Also for the Gentile. I want to share another passage that really talks about, really goes completely the other way. And it's in Ephesians 6. I love this passage. And just to give you context of this passage, he's actually talking about the armor of God. But, moreover, he's talking about the seventh piece of the armor of God. So when we talk about the armor of God, we talk about the breastplate of righteousness, the shoes of the gospel of peace, the belt of truth. We talk about the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit, and the shield of faith. Right? 6 pieces of armor that get talked about. As a matter of fact, my shirt this morning is actually, I probably should have left it off, but it's cold, is actually the armor of God. It's all the pieces of the armor of God. But then he talks about another, which I truly believe is another piece of the armor, which is prayer. Because it's so important, and I want to go over that. But I want you to hear verse 20. I really want you to hear verse 20, because I want you to hear the wording in verse 20. So he says, praying always with all prayer and supplication in the Spirit, being watchful to this end with all perseverance and supplication for all saints. So in other words, we're supposed to pray for one another, for all saints, right? So we're supposed to pray over all of our brothers and sisters. And for me, that utterance may be given to me, that I may open my mouth boldly to make known the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in chains, that in it I may speak boldly as I ought to speak. Do you hear that? I'm going to repeat verses 19 and 20 again. Paul's praying, and this should really be our prayer. Not just Paul's prayer. This should be our prayer. This should be a prayer we're praying, we're bringing to the throne. For me, that utterance may be given to me, that I may open my mouth boldly to make known the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in chains. Paul was imprisoned at this point in time, but that in it I may speak boldly as I ought to speak. Not as I should speak, not as I might speak, as I ought to. Hear the wording there? Ought means we are to. We're commanded to. And what did you hear me talk about yesterday in the gospel? When we're talking about the gospel, what are we commanded to do with the gospel? He says in Matthew 28, go therefore and make disciples. Sharing the gospel, right? So in it, here's the prayer. For, you know what, Lord, I don't know what to say when I get out there. When those moments present themselves, I don't know what to say. I don't want to say the wrong thing. You plant seeds, but this is a prayer. This is a prayer that you should fold into your daily life, your daily prayer life. This was a prayer I prayed very early in my walk because I loved going through the armor of God. And that was just where God led me with this prayer. God led me to this prayer in praying the armor of God every day over myself and praying it over all of the saints. Is give me utterance that I may open my mouth to make known the mystery of the gospel, for which I'm an ambassador in chains, right? Because we're enchained in this world. We're enslaved in this world. Our chains have been broken. We're free. But the world and the culture doesn't like Christianity. The world doesn't like Christianity. Why is the world so against Christianity? It's because the enemy hates Christians. The enemy hates Christ followers. Why? Because the enemy knows he was defeated by their leader. He knows that sin and death has been defeated at the cross. He thought he had a victory. And then Jesus rose. Whoops. That one got through his hands. Right? When we ask for boldness, he's going to give it. Because why? He commands us to go therefore. So if we're asking for boldness to share the gospel, guess what? It means you intend to go therefore. And you're asking for help to go therefore. He's going to give it. He's not going to be afraid to give it. He's not going to give it in shy portions. He's not going to give it to you in a shot glass. Here you go. He's going to give it to you through a fire hydrant. He's going to crack open a fire hydrant and out it's going to come. And it's crazy to watch it happen. I went from I barely understood the gospel to, hey, you ever heard of Jesus Christ? He gives it, guys. So, what are our two responses? We can either be ashamed of the gospel, in which Romans 1:16 tells us that we shouldn't be ashamed of the gospel because in it is the power of salvation. And the other option is we can pray for boldness. Ephesians 6 verses 19 and 20, right? While you're in there, you might as well just go verses 10 through 20 and just go through the gospel. Go through the armor of God and equip yourself. Helmet of salvation, breastplate of righteousness, belt of truth, shoes of the gospel of peace. Why were these shoes of the gospel? Why when we talk about the gospel of peace do we use shoes? Well, Roman soldiers wore shoes with big cleats on the bottom, so that when they got into battle, they were able to forge ahead. The cleats weren't just to hold their position. The cleats were actually to help them advance their position. So what are we supposed to do with the gospel of peace? We're supposed to advance the gospel of peace. That's why the gospel is, when it comes to armor, is talked about in the shoes, because we're supposed to advance the gospel, much like the Roman soldiers advanced with the cleats on their feet. And the shield of faith, right, with which we thwart off all of the fiery darts of the enemy. But the sword of the Spirit is the word of God. Typical Bible is about 18 inches. And A sword back then was typically 18 inches. They didn't have these big 3 feet swords. They had 18-inch daggers, little short swords, so that they can thrust when they're in close quarters. Which is why they need their shoes of the gospel of peace, so they can advance. And they had little short swords they can use, but the sword of the Spirit is 18 inches. Typical Bible diagonally is about 18 inches. Sword of the Spirit, right? When we give the Holy Spirit everything we need, everything He needs, when we fold the Word into our heart, we give Him everything He needs so that we can advance the gospel. He gives us the words we need at the time so that people are exposed and see Jesus. They don't see Jim. They don't see Sherry. They don't see Six. They see Jesus. Morning, Ron. Share the gospel at all costs. And when necessary, use words. Sometimes we're the only Bible that people get to read, guys. Be the Bible. Be that Bible that they get to read. Don't be a really bad representation of it. Don't be a really bad translation of it. Because sometimes people see that and they go, that's a Christian? I don't want Christ. So that's why, and you guys have heard me use this, you guys have heard me use this analogy before, but if you have 100 people in a pitch black cave and one person strikes a match, where are the other 99 sets of eyes going to go? 100 sets of eyes are going to go to the right to that light. And when there's darkness, much like when we're in a very dark place, where do the eyes go? The eyes are drawn to the light. They're going to magnet to the light in that room, which is you. And they're going to watch you, and they're going to look. They're going to see what you do. If you're in a doctor's office and you're having to wait, are you waiting patiently and lovingly? Or are you being a Karen? Or are you kicking up your feet and making a fuss? Are you loving on those sitting around you? Are you loving on the others sitting around you that, I gotta wait. No big deal. It is what it is. I'll get in there. I'll get in there when I'm supposed to be. When I'm supposed to be in there, I'll get in there. Right now, I'm here. God's got me here. So, guess what? Sitting in that doctor's office, that's your mission field. Wherever you are, that's your mission field. I went and had stereo installed in the truck yesterday because it's what I wanted for my birthday. And I had a little longer wait than what I wanted to wait. But I didn't kick my feet. I used that opportunity to sit there and talk to the people at the desk. Sit there and talk to the people in the front. Share the gospel. So, 2 responses. Be ashamed of it, or you can be bold with it. Romans 1:16 says, "For I'm not ashamed." Phil Wickham's The Bridge of Phil Wickham's song. I'll never be ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. How can I ever walk away from the one who saved my life? Or you can be bold with it. 2 responses. So, I love you guys. I know He loves you like crazy. We'll be back tomorrow with whatever Dad wants to talk about. Love you guys.